Class, MASH. By a Nutty. Chapter 301, Anger. MASH found Jill, and within a few seconds, he was out of the city. There was no need to tell her the plan. All of them were being given the plan by Priscilla, so he hadn't had to say a single word. Once he arrived, all she had to do was touch him to send him out of the city. The teleportation disoriented Lisa, but he was able to hold on to her. She grumbled once they were outside. That was odd. You get used to it. MASH replied without much thought. His mind was still elsewhere. Not wrapped up in guilt or regret, but rather thinking about what to do about his class. He was close to his next advancement now, and his golden body had improved considerably. The change was surprising, and he wondered what the cause was. If he could recreate it once more, then he could finish it in one go. Do you have a sea coat or a heated stone? I am able to power those easily. Lisa shivered and she couldn't speak without shaking a little. She hadn't grabbed a coat or anything to brace against the cold. In fact, she wore the same thing robe that was definitely not meant to keep her warm. He hadn't been conscious of her with all of the excitement, but the question broke the urgency in his mind a little bit. And like that, he became aware of the beautiful girl who was clinging to his arm. Albeit one that was covered in a layer of wood and shaped into a hook. But his magic let him feel her through the wood, and MASH rapidly raised the surrounding temperature. Sorry, I can do that. MASH intentionally made it really hot to help cover for his embarrassment. Now was not the time for this. He reprimanded himself as Lisa stared around herself, distracted by the sudden change in temperature. Waving one hand in the air around her, she spoke full of amazement. Your mana control is incredible. And all the abilities you have are incredible. I know it's inappropriate, but what is your class called? All of this seems a little unfair. She touched the wooden arm as she gestured at all of the different things he had done. MASH coughed a little as he responded. It felt too much like he was doing something wrong. I can feel you through the wood. I'm sorry, I should have said something earlier, but I forgot. He felt like he was making an excuse, but there wasn't much else he could say. Lisa met his eyes and laughed in his face. All you're doing is carrying me. I mean, it would have been nice to know, but it wouldn't have really mattered. I would have come with you even if I needed to climb on your back. I really do want to help. MASH let out a breath, finding it easier to respond now that he apologized. For your previous question, my class is Chimeric Vagabond. I think it's unique though, I can't be sure. Lisa's cheek bulged as she pushed her tongue against the inside of it. Her gaze drifted down toward the ground. MASH wondered what she was doing. A few seconds later her head snapped up, and she spoke quickly. I know the Vagabond class isn't unique, but the prefix is something I haven't heard before. And you can check if your class is unique. The auction house has a few people with skills that can determine that. MASH realized she had been thinking. That was just what she did when she was lost in thought. The words caught him off guard though. Wait, how? They have classes to evaluate the worth of something. They can do it with pieces of information just as easily items most of the time. The ones in the city get plenty of tertiary information as well. The uniqueness of something is part of that. Well, that was certainly interesting. Plus, it seemed like classes and skills was a subject that Lisa enjoyed. When she talked about it, her words became more informal. They weren't impolite, and he considered it to be a good thing. There are a lot of things I could get checked. He spoke while thinking of all the things he could check with them. Then he wondered what other classes could get extra information from information. Was there someone who could help him learn more about his skills or ideas? Could there be a skill that just lets someone know about the world owner? He knew that classes were versatile, but this opened a lot of possibilities. I wouldn't share anything important unless you know them personally. Those classes are typically required to report any findings to their kingdoms. If you give up the wrong kind of information, it could wind up poorly. I have made that mistake already. She didn't have to say more. The look she gave told him the story. He could only nod in response. It grew silent for a bit, and MASH tried to break it with a joke. I think it would be fine. My brother is probably going to be the next king, not to mention my sister is a saint for the moon goddess, who is my friend. And now that I think about it, Luke is probably going to become a god too. He said it with a smile. None of what he said was a lie, but he waited for her to react incredulously. Her eyes widened, and she stared at him in silence. Well, that was surprising. It seemed like she trusted everything he had said. Which meant that he definitely shared too much. I can tell when someone is lying. Sorry, I should have told you. Mash shook his head quickly. What? Why would you tell me? Wouldn't that defeat the purpose? It is considered rude to not tell people of skills that could be considered invasive in a private setting. She cleared her throat as she said. That was not something Mash had ever heard, though he guessed that this was a cultural thing. Oh. Well, I have a skill that lets me see everything within my domain completely. He seriously considered if that was something he would need to tell people when he met them. On top of making them uncomfortable, it just felt awkward. Lisa didn't react as he expected and instead began interrogating him on it. What is the skill called? And how does the sight work? Do you see everything in it like you would with your eyes, or is it something else? The series of questions surprised him. He had to think as he answered them all. First, it's called chimeric domain. It's not like sight. It is more like the whole space is connected to me. The things inside of it are outlined by their shape, mana, life, and more. I can kind of perceive emotions and strength and stuff. He probably shouldn't be explaining so much. And if the others were here, they would probably stop him. He just didn't think that Lisa would be using the information poorly anytime soon. Not to mention it was hard to tell someone like her no. She was obviously doing things she wouldn't have been able to do as a slave, and she was so earnest about it. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she prodded Mash about his class. And he answered most of the questions. Once they had gone back and forth for a little bit, she surprised him by turning the questions to him. If you want to know anything about my class, please ask. This feels too one-sided right now. Mash did have his own questions. He was about to ask her how she had seen through his trick when they first met, but he halted when he spotted the army. Later, I see them. The talk had been enjoyable, and he regretted letting it drop. Most people were so defensive about their classes, and he was interested in the subject too. While he wanted the information, it would have to be after they dealt with the army. Mash slowed as the army began to notice them. Mash could see his head swung up to them and he wondered how they spotted him. And I think they see us. How did they manage that? The trail of hot air is noticeable. Lisa responded smartly. He glanced back and saw what she meant. Raising the temperature around him functionally left a trail that any could see. The weather or time couldn't hide that. Even now the air around them was turning to fog. He wondered why he hadn't noticed that on his way to the city and remembered that he had only heated up his body at the time. He dropped from the air slowly, in what he thought was a non-threatening manner. It didn't work, and Mash watched as a ball of fire flew toward him. He held up his free hand to stop it but noticed Lisa doing the same. I can handle this. She said it so certainly, that he let his hand drop. Despite the gesture, he prepared to form a shield of wind. He didn't really know what her class did. Although, he got a good glimpse as he watched what she did with the mana. She seemed to attach something to the fireball. He couldn't see what it was until the fireball entered his domain. The fireball was large. Easily twice as large as he was, and it had similarly left a very noticeable trail. It showed him how indiscreet his own journey had been. He had been as invisible as a literal ball of fire. Now that the ball of fire was close, Mash could see what Lisa had done. There was an invisible mark on the fireball. His eyes couldn't see it, but he could see its shape through the domain. The ball of fire turned sharply, spinning around them a few times before shrinking considerably. It kept shrinking as it got closer. Like a moon, it kept rotating around them. By the time it reached them it was smaller than an egg. And it was hovering in place over Lisa's palm. The skill wasn't over. The fireball dissolved into a floating blue symbol. It was the mark he had seen earlier, only it was the size of a small coin. Then it fell onto her palm and vanished. Now he had more questions to ask when he got the chance. That was for later, as he landed. The army had stopped after the fast attack. Probably realizing that an enemy wouldn't have made such a public arrival. Or someone recognized Lisa's skill. Mash landed a good distance away, the snow melting around them as they touched the ground. The two of them started walking toward the coming army. Lisa waved her hands happily, and 3 people split off from the army. Lisa pointed out the frontmost of the group. That's the commander. His name is Jorgen, and he did the best he could in his position. He saved a lot of us. He wasn't really a slave, but he was treated like one. I know you aren't just going to be violent, but he, like everyone, will be justifiably angry. She glanced at Mash, who just shrugged. Although, he felt like there was some implication in her words. Angry at me? What did I do? He would have expected the opposite. Lisa replied without turning away from the incoming army. Not for what you did, but what you will do. They will want blood and a lot of it. Slavers were awful, but they weren't the only awful people. Many people got bad when they owned a person. He couldn't keep a polite expression, and his face twisted in disgust. But she was right. It wasn't that he was going to defend such people, but he was going to leave it to General Urkish to deal with the punishments. That would almost certainly be death for most too, but it felt more right, which was enough for him. Mash didn't care much for the people Lisa described, but he just wanted to do whatever felt most right for him. Lisa shouted once the man got in range. Jurg. It's good to see you. Mash heard the man bellow back his response. His voice was far louder and deeper. It even made some of the snow between them rumble. You too. It's a damn good day to be alive. He roared the words like a beast. The man laughed loudly, revealing a set of sharpened teeth. Mash's own teeth were like that, and he couldn't stop himself from smiling. He put his teeth on display as the commander got close enough to see. The man only seemed to take notice of Mash then. His gaze darted toward him, and Mash saw disturbingly full eyes. His pale blue irises almost completely filled his eyes. The pupil was unusually large too, and Mash could see as it narrowed on him. And Mash felt like he was in the odd position of looking at someone with more disturbing eyes than himself. Chapter 302, Violence Breeds. Mash stared into the other man's face, right up until something slammed into his domain. Mash was caught off guard, but so was the commander. The man stepped back, and Mash glanced around trying to figure out what had happened. The man has a similar domain. It clashed with yours. He nodded as he came to the same conclusion. The gesture was wasted on the audience, but Jurg had noticed it and stared at Mash more carefully. Then the man shook his own head and forced himself forward. The two domains clashed again, and Mash was able to get a better feel for it. It felt like Jurg was manipulating his own domain, trying to worm its way past Mash's. Mash took the opportunity to observe what Jurg was doing and noticed that the man's domain was weaker. When he noticed that, Mash changed what he had been trying to do. Rather than just push Jurg back, Mash did what he was best at. He made his domain consume the other man's. Not with a skill or anything, he just tried overpowering it. Mash stepped forward while he did it, and the commander's domain broke. It crumbled into nothingness as the man was surrounded by Mash's domain. The man stumbled forward, but to his credit, he managed to stay upright. Lisa and the two soldiers didn't know about the unseen battle, but one of the soldiers tensed. His hand quickly raised to the shaft of a great axe that he had strapped to his back. Jurg waved him down while rubbing a hand through his hair. He was the only dwarf that Mash had seen with short hair, and it looked more like brown fur than hair. That was humbling. I'm Jurg. Who are you? And why are you lighting up like a Christmas tree to my class? Mash smiled toothily and replied with his chest puffed in a winning posture. I'm Mash, and I have no idea. What class do you have? Beastmaster. And before you say something stupid, I don't enslave anything. Beast or otherwise. Jurg met Mash's eyes defiantly. He clearly wasn't satisfied with the result, and it came through in the rough way he responded. The two soldiers and Lisa noticed it too. I feel like I am missing something, but I must add that Mash was the one to kill the king and free us. He also destroyed all of the crystals instead of claiming them. I wouldn't do that. Mash felt genuinely offended by the association. Even if it gave him all the power in the world, he wouldn't do it. I know. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. She looked like she genuinely meant that, and he nodded agreeably. Lisa had basically been completely open and direct after being freed, and he wondered how much she had needed to hide as a slave. How long did she have to act? Jurg took the whole thing in stride and clapped Mash on the back. His predatory look vanished, and he smiled like he was looking at a long-lost friend. One of the soldiers next to him spoke before he could though. I know, first I. He seemed to struggle with what to say. Finally, he settled on a simpler response. Thank you. Even now, I can't really believe it. I don't think I can ever feel like it's real. It's why we are even bothering going back to the city. We want to see the king's body. That and free everyone else. Mash didn't know how to react to that. Mainly because the soldier wouldn't be able to see the king's body. Lisa responded for him though. He killed the king, but kind of destroyed the body too. The earl too. As for the rest, he and his friends are handling it. Jörg looked the most surprised by the news. He took another close look at Mash, this time his gaze was searching for something. Mash raised an eyebrow, and the man responded. I just didn't expect you to be the type to have so much prepared. You look more like some of my soldiers. The type who would just kill the king and expect everything to work out. That wasn't fair. There had been a plan. It had gone off track, but they had made one. Mash felt like this was going better than expected, and he began to tell Jörg the rest of it. Sharing what Urkish had told him, along with how they would get everyone out. The discussion took a few minutes, but the commander didn't ask any questions. He made a few comments to make the transfer easier, but he didn't disagree with anything at all. In fact, Jörg nodded to almost everything and only asked a question at the end. What about the slavers and slaveholders? He didn't sound angry or bloodthirsty. It just seemed like any other question, and Mash replied just as nonchalantly. My kingdom will deal with them, along with everything else. That's not enough. I need you to promise me that all of them will die. The fact that he delivered those words with his tone shifting at all was frightening. And he asked for something that Mash couldn't do. I think I could promise that for the slavers. Mash didn't need to say anything else. Jörg's head shook slightly. Not good enough. Do you really think the rest of the army, or I would settle for anything less? Would you? Those questions stung because he knew the truth of it. He wouldn't settle. Even if he wouldn't, he still needed to ask them to stop them if it came to it. Not because he believed he had the right, but because it was the decision that he felt most okay about. If he had learned anything, that was the most important thing to him right now. And he would continue to do so moving forward. Whatever the consequences of his decisions would be, if he could live with them and feel proud of those decisions regardless, then what else could he expect? The resolve that came from that firmed Mash's stance, and he locked eyes with Jörg then. There is no way around this, is there? Nothing else. Jörg smiled sadly as one of his hands entered a pouch at his side. It was an older type of storage space. Each of us has our own list of monsters, just like I bet you did. You cleared yours, and we will clear ours. Although, I need to thank you too. The names you erased were on all of our lists too. Mash saw the determination set in the man's eyes as he pulled out a war hammer from the bag. I am level 130 and am specialized in dealing with armies. Bring up your argument with the king. I'm just doing what I think will let me move forward. The hair on his body grew thicker and turned into thick fur. Mash decided to mix his cat and wolf forms. The dragon and wyvern forms were too deadly, and he didn't want to kill them. Although that would be another challenge in itself. At high levels, it became a lot harder to fight someone without killing them. He couldn't do it though. Even if it meant letting them do what they want. Even if he had to fight at less than half strength. Killing them would haunt him more than failing. He had let his control of the temperature drop and cold air rushed in. The general began growing. His muscles bulged, and the hammer that had been meant to be used with two hands was now comfortably held in one. The commander's face became more feral, his teeth grew larger, and fur crawled over his face. Was his class similar to Mash's? There were so many things Mash wanted to ask now, but it was too late for questions. It seemed like that was becoming a trend. He didn't like it. A bit of advice from someone old. At our level, we fight for blood. We have healers to save most anyways. And even if we aren't trying to kill one another, we are simply too strong for anything less. His voice was actually less deep despite his size. Mash had been expecting the opposite in truth, but now he sounded more like a normal man than a graveling beast. Although the things he said would have better fit his old voice. Mash nodded and replied. I will still try. Mash lunged with the statement. The commander was dense, and it felt more like kicking the very ground. Mash was the highest leveled person here, and even without his dragon form, his kick sent the general soaring. The man had grown to be around twice as big as Mash, but the kick still took him off of his feet. The snow billowed out as he crashed into the army behind him. Even before the kick came out, he started shouting at Lisa. Get out of here! The two soldiers who had followed the commander didn't even glance back. They knew better than to worry for their superior. And the commander had landed squarely in the middle of his army, meaning that he was probably getting healed already. The thought came unaided to him, as he began processing how to fight an army. One of the soldiers swiped at Mash with an axe. As the commander had said, the man didn't hesitate to swipe at Mash's neck. The soldier's weapon shone at the last moment, but that was enough for Mash to react. The combination of the two forms made his reactions nearly instant, and he turned his body to avoid the blow. The two soldiers were in his domain too, so Mash could see when they used a skill. The axe that had been coming from the side warped. And now the soldier was swinging the weapon down in an overhead swing. On instinct, he turned his body, and the weapon slid across the side of his arm. It cut some fur but didn't touch him otherwise. And Mash was falling back into a rhythm. He used the moment of the dodge to twist his body toward the ground. He pushed off it with one hand and swung back around. An open palm struck the soldier in the chest as his swing carried the axe into the ground. His hand slipped from the axe as he was launched directly into the sky. Mash kicked at the last soldier who had tried getting around Mash. A barrier appeared around him blocking the kick. Pain spread through the leg. It felt like something had stabbed the bottom of his foot, but he saw that there was no blood. His mind made a connection a second later. The barrier reflected some of the damage. Grimacing at the pain, Mash kicked off the barrier, giving himself some distance to work with. He thought about turning into a giant of some kind, but that would be too indiscriminate. The same was true of any powerful lightning. Both would kill. The army's levels were too variable for him to do anything widespread. Plus, they would have healers for the strongest. Mash realized he didn't have that much experience in fighting an army without killing them. Now that it was happening, he realized he didn't have any experience when it came to fighting an army that had classes and skills. He was strong against armies of monsters, not this. Mash needed another option. Mash, more people are coming for you. The neighboring kingdoms have sent a few high-leveled people to capture or kill you. He froze for a half-second as the message shook him from the fight. What? Why? How? Mash replied with a stream of questions, which Priscilla could actually preempt and respond to. Her replies came as soon as the questions ended. Your announcement had been heard by any number of spies. And the North as a whole has determined your actions to be invasive. As a representative of another kingdom, attempting to kidnap an entire city, regardless of the reason, has marked you as a threat. Priscilla repeated the message. Red had been the one to get it. Apparently, Kirik was awake, and he had been informed through some intracity communication system. Mash groaned as he looked at the army. Chapter 303, Berserk. The army had gathered themselves and had gotten into formations. None of which Mash understood. And Yurg was back up and was marching towards him too. He also seemed to have a plethora of buffing skills on him. He lit up the night sky like a lamp with how much magic covered his skin. Would Yurg stop if he knew of the situation? The set expression on the commander's face told him that there was no way out of this other than a fight. He gave it a thought and asked Priscilla another question. How long till those other people come? And what's their level like? Priscilla didn't have an immediate answer, but she could hopefully get one. Even if it wasn't exact, it was important. Mash had to win this fight, and still, have enough strength for whatever came. The soldier that had been launched into the air only just landed. The snow cushioned his fall, but Mash still winced. The man had been weaker than Mash's estimation. He was missing something about this army. He was certain of that. Lisa had said that this army dealt with the monsters around the area, which meant that they should be a lot stronger. Mash took a breath as ideas began popping into his head. Nothing was particularly complex, but it felt like his mind was finally working properly. There were too many things to deal with, and he just had to ignore them for the moment. His first target was the army before him. He didn't need to beat them. Only stop them, and that was a much more achievable goal. The army was obviously centered around Yurg. If he fell, the army would cluster to help him recover. It would slow them, hopefully, long enough for the assassins to get here. He hoped that Yurg actually seeing them would stop him. Or at least it would call for a temporary ceasefire. Mash opened his storage and grabbed a staff. Yurg was marching in a very organized manner. There was probably a reason for it, but it did give Mash some time to work with. The staff was good for this, but the real reason he opened the storage was the other thing he had stored in there. After talking about the plan, Mash had spent most of his energy making wooden clones before sleeping last night. And now he decided to make that a daily routine. At least until it was full. He couldn't store an army, but he could fit more than the paltry 5 that walked out. Though each was considerably more durable than the average creation. He had sacrificed a good amount of his health when he made them, and they were stronger for it. They stepped around Mash, and he gave them a simple command. None of them looked exactly like him, especially now with the fur surrounding his body, but they could follow some instructions. Don't kill anyone. Knock them out or restrain them. That should be just enough to avoid the worst. The wooden replicas started forward at a sprint. Mash joined them and matched his speed with them. They weren't as strong or fast as any of his transformations, but they had access to some of his magics and could do a lot of damage with just that. He remembered one last thing and sent them another command. No lighting magics. Forgetting that would have been bad. Yerg stopped his march, and the shoulders directly to his left and right pulled out glowing shields. They were identical. Then the shields seemed to meld together until a uniform wall had grown across them. Army skills were annoying, as their strength relied on the relative power of the army that used them. This army was smaller than most with only a few thousand soldiers. However, they had levels, and that improved the durability of the wall significantly. His creations wouldn't be able to get through. But Mash still could. He slowed as he closed the remaining distance. Once he got in range, he let his knees bend more than normal, and jumped at the wall. He had transformed a single arm into his dragon form, and he struck the wall with the clawed hand. The wall shook and Mash managed to push the army back for a second, as cracks spread from where he had struck. The claws had actually managed to pierce the shield. Mash tried to draw his arm back to swing again when Yerg himself plowed through the wall. The skill obviously hadn't been reinforced on both sides, and the commander shattered it. He full body tackled Mash. Yerg was massive and his shoulder tackle was more than enough to carry Mash away. If that had been all, Mash could have braced himself. But there was a second burst of power as the shield itself broke with Yerg's attack. The shield burst like a bubble, and it exploded. And with enough force to push Yerg forward with even more speed. The combination rattled Mash's brain a little, making his concentration slip. The commander carried from the ground and into the nearest set of trees. Mash had barely noticed the slight forest behind. Now he got a good look as he was slammed repeatedly into trees. He barely felt that, but his body still hurt from the shield's explosion. On top of the raw force it had expelled, the barrier seemed to have targeted Mash's insides somehow. There was some internal damage, and there was only so much healing that he could do without any corpses to consume. It wasn't zero healing though. He still had the necklace, and Priscilla could help speed it up by focusing on it more. Wood grew from Mash's back and shot into the ground. Other strands reached out and wrapped around trees. At first, it did nothing to stop Yerg from charging, but eventually, there were too many and the man slowed. Mash felt his feet touch the ground and he swung quickly. His hand tore into Yerg's chest. His hand was no longer that of his dragon form, but even his wolf form had claws. The claws were strong too, and they easily cut through the man's skin. The wounds didn't feel deep though. Yerg's growth had changed his body fundamentally to support the additional height and weight, which seemed to include excessively dense muscles. Yerg stumbled back, and Mash shouted at him. The other kingdoms are sending high-level people after me. Yerg didn't respond in a human way. He growled and swung his hammer one-handed. Mash easily dodged it by stepping backward. What kind of kingdom appointed a berserker as a commander? It made no sense. And why did he claim that he was a beastmaster? Mash was still waiting for when the man summoned a creature or called a monster upon them. After Yerg missed with the swing, he just threw the hammer at Mash. They will be here in half an hour. The highest leveled among them are estimated to be below 200. Both are just rough estimates. Priscilla's message was concerning. Mash would definitely need to go all out against anyone over 150. Plus, he should use his free stats before they arrive. He messaged Priscilla back as he sidestepped the hammer. You take over. Don't kill anyone. The hammer missed and flew past Mash. He thought little of it, until he felt the mana around his body shift against him. His whole body felt squished as raw force pushed him back. His mind understood what had happened even if his body didn't. Yerg had a sure hit skill, but the damage wasn't really significant. Although it wasn't that hard to actually move him when he wasn't using his dragon form. The blow sent him tumbling backward, and his head smashed through the snow to strike the ground. Mash felt the blow and turned it into a backward roll. He popped to his feet and gave up control of his body to Priscilla to adjust his status. It would take a few seconds, but he needed to do it. Yerg was dangerous, but in a way, he was the least of Mash's worries. The man probably wouldn't kill him even if he had the chance, and he was lower level than Mash. There were people over 150 who were coming. They would be the most dangerous. He didn't need to think long about his adjustments to his status. He knew what would be most important in a fight where he was at a disadvantage. Name, Mash Stel Lumber Class, Chimeric Vagabond. Level, 121-131. Health, 3109/3330. Energy, 3799/4590. Fortitude, 333 plus 67 400. Endurance, 229. Strength, 278 plus 63 341. Agility, 279 plus 100 379. Intelligence, 230. Wisdom, 130. Charisma, 110. Free stats, 230. Skills, Hunt, Magical Layered Wood, Inhuman Hibernation, Chimeric Transformation, Wooden Birth, Chimeric Reconstruction, Vagabond's Path, Chimeric Domain, Reconstructed Adaptable Monster Core, Chimera's Constitution, Wooden Body, Mimic's Avarice, Harbinger of Nothing, Golden Body. It really had only taken him a few seconds to get everything done. He needed to be durable enough to take a hit, and he needed to be fast enough to respond to them. Those were his biggest concerns. With his forms, he had thought he had enough power to hurt them, maybe even kill them if he could hit something vital. Mash took control of his body back and caught Jurg's punch with an open palm. Priscilla and he shared her experience, for the most part, and Mash could see what she had done. She had changed his arms to the dragon form but had kept his body the same. With the scales reinforcing his arms, he could block most hits and could still use his staff to actually strike the man. It was a simple enough application, and Mash really should have thought of it sooner. Well, the fight only started a few minutes ago, so he wouldn't beat himself too much about it. The bonus stats made themselves known immediately as the hammer stopped against Mash's hand. His arm didn't even buckle. Even enraged, Jurg seemed to realize something had changed. The very visible muscles on Jurg's body rippled as Mash struck with a kick. The force dissipated through the man's body as if Mash had just struck the ocean. Jurg reeled back with ripple and threw his arms out wide. He brought them back together as his body seemed to redirect the force back forward. The whole thing made for a very strange sight. Mash's instincts told him blocking wasn't a good option, but he couldn't dodge with that sure hit skill either. He settled on hitting back instead. Mash threw a very careful punch, trying to aim to just strike the man's arms. Jurg losing an arm might end the fight, and Luke could heal it easily too. Although, Mash had to do an awkward strike to match Jurg. His staff wouldn't be able to stop this, so he dropped his staff and threw both of his fists forward in a strange double punch. Their fists met and Mash's ears were filled with a terrible crunching sound. A sound that he only had a moment to comprehend before he was carried off his feet. His legs were not in the dragon form and couldn't brace his body properly. Now it was Mash's turn to get thrown like a rock. He crashed through trees and rocks, leaving a trail of destruction as he tumbled out of the forest. Snow and dirt chased him as he moved. He regained some semblance of balance and drove his hands into the ground. They clawed through the dirt, and he realized that his arms were fine. He glanced back up to see the trail of destruction he had left. Chapter 304, Rushing to Decisions. Many trees had fallen onto their sides, and almost all of the snow had been pushed aside. He had basically constructed a dirt road, though an uneven one. Mash was covered in mud as the snow wetted the dirt and smeared his clothing. He wasn't bleeding though. In fact, there wasn't much damage on him at all. His clothes prevented most mundane stones from scratching or hurting him. The only thing that stung, even a little, were his fingers. Although, they weren't broken. Jurg came into vision, as he blew through a tree that had fallen on its side. Now the breaking sound from earlier made sense. And it made Mash wince when he saw it. Both of Jurg's hands were a mess. Bones poked through his skin awkwardly, and they bled a lot. He left a very noticeable trail as he punched through some of the rubble. His hands left prints on everything that he touched, and it dripped onto the ground too. The man's head swung around until he spotted Mash. Then he charged. Mash quickly rose to his feet, not sure about what to do next. Jurg probably wouldn't die, but his state told Mash that it was going to be incredibly difficult to get him to stop. Mash frowned and resolved himself to do something extreme. He would break both of Jurg's arms and legs. Tear them off if he needed to. That wouldn't be easy and was more gruesome than he wanted. But he was worried about the army too. The imitations he had made were doing well at distracting them, but they weren't able to do any real damage. Especially not with the orders Mash had given them. The assassins will be here in a few minutes. Your friends as well. So soon. It certainly hadn't been close to the half hour that Priscilla had mentioned before. Even as Priscilla responded, Mash began to transform. All of his fur and skin turned to scales. Mash needed to end this, even if it was going to be more gruesome than he liked. Apparently one of those that is coming has a movement skill of some kind. He didn't respond to the message. Instead, he met eyes with Jurg, trying to see if the man could respond to him or not. His gaze was still too empty, or rather it was full of animalistic rage. Mash didn't charge at the man. Jurg was doing that for both of them. Mash set his feet and let wood dig through the ground like roots. He let his claws grow out a little more and prepared to stop Jurg. The man had grown even more somehow. His whole body looked off at this point. His head seemed too small for his body and muscles had torn through most of his clothing. He was more like a bull now, and he tried with all of his might to move Mash. It failed. Mash had basically grown entire trees in the ground, and with his own strength, Jurg couldn't move him. Mash couldn't really grab Jurg's arms like he wanted to. Rather than risking a more serious wound, Mash formed blades out of his claws and held them in place like pikes. They cut into Jurg's shoulder. Earlier Jurg had been able to spread the force of his punch over his whole body, but as Mash had expected, it didn't work quite as well with something sharp. His claws dug through the man's flesh and even cut through bone just easily. Jurg roared, and his muscles clenched together. It wouldn't have stopped Mash if he kept pushing, but it wasn't meant to. It killed Jurg's own momentum and stopped him from making the injury worse. Sorry. It felt stupid to say it now, but he did it anyways. Mash swung both his arms up, nearly severing both of Jurg's arms off. The man stumbled away, his arms swaying as they hung limply. Mash kind of hoped that he would run away after that, but his face only contorted with more anger. It wasn't as much of a problem anymore though. He couldn't really do anything but run at this point, and Mash could break his legs easily enough. He needed to do it now though as the army began marching forward. They hadn't actually beat Mash's imitations, but they didn't seem to care as soldiers fell to them. No, they were willing to sacrifice people to get to Jurg. He hoped that was because they knew his imitations weren't killing anyone. Mash prepared to leap at the commander. Lisa leaped onto Jurg's back, seeming almost like a squirrel when compared to Jurg's gargantuan size. She scrambled up his back, as Jurg uselessly spun to try and get her off. Without his arms, he couldn't remove her easily. Which was probably why she was choosing this moment to jump in. He just wondered what the next step was. She got to his head and clapped two hands over his ears. They were cupped slightly. Her mouth moved, but she was too far away for him to hear. His domain reached them though. The boost to his stats made it large enough to encompass them. He saw mana moving through Lisa's body. It spun around her in a rhythmic way, and then passed through her hands into Jurg. Jurg struggled to resist. Although his body slowed rapidly as if she was tying weights on him. Eventually, Jurg just fell forward. His enormous frame thumped onto the ground. The injuries didn't even seem to bother him anymore. Mash realized a second later that he was asleep. The peaceful expression on his face didn't match his bloodied body. His arms were hanging on by strands of muscle and nothing else. The fact that Lisa could suppress the pain of that enough to let him sleep was frightening. If that was as effective as it seemed, she could kill most people in their sleep. He shook his head, dismissing the thought immediately. That was a bad way of looking at it. The skill obviously had other uses. Mash sent a command to his imitations. They immediately broke off from their fights and began to run back toward Mash. They were faster than the marching army and passed them quickly. The army had shifted when the imitations got close. A few soldiers even attempted to hit them with arrows. Only one arrow landed on target, but it didn't do any damage. Arrows didn't do much against something made entirely of wood, and they closed the distance quickly. Mash turned to Lisa. His mind was surprisingly clear despite the fight he just had. Get Jurg to his healers. Tell him that the other cities have sent high-leveled people after me. I need to confront them. If Jurg will listen to you, convince him to focus on keeping the rest of the city safe. Everyone if he is willing. Lisa had been checking Jurg's injuries, but she turned sharply at Mash's words. Concern painted her face, and her voice wavered as she spoke. Are they here for us? I would rather die than let that happen. The fatalism in her voice was a little scary. Mash decided to wait for Priscilla's response and only replied once he knew. No, doesn't seem like it. At least that wasn't what they were ordered to do. It seems like I have been branded a terrorist by the northern kingdoms in general. The orders are just for me. How do you know? Her gaze grew uncertain as she searched his face. Mash shrugged before answering. I can talk to my friends in the city. They are talking with some of the guards, and they know the situation. Mash had explained many of his abilities but had still refrained from introducing her to Priscilla. There probably wasn't a good reason for it. He just felt like it wasn't something he should say in the open. Priscilla was an advantage that was more pronounced if other people didn't know about her. Lisa nodded, but she didn't look much more hopeful. They will probably try and capture us afterward. Once Jurg wakes up, we can help you. I will convince him. She said it with resolve and began dragging Jurg over toward the rest of the army. Mash considered helping, but she was actually strong enough to carry him. The real problem was the difference in size, but Jurg's skill was wearing off and his body was shrinking. It wasn't a fast process though. So, she ended up dragging him by his legs. Although she did lay his arms over his chest first. Mash winced when she moved them. They were literally hanging on by a thread, and Mash was sure that Jurg was grateful to be unconscious. Mash turned his thoughts to the next fight. This one would be a lot harder. Even with his friends around, the level difference would be impactful. Although, the strength of their classes couldn't be understated. His class was especially unique and powerful. The people who were coming probably didn't have classes that could match. It would matter less with those over 150, but the ones around his level should be considerably weaker than him. Like Jurg, many of them would struggle to even hurt Mash. He did have things he could further improve. Even now, with only minutes to spare, he had an idea that would probably work. The soul let him glimpse into what he imagined was a representation of his soul. And he remembered the fruit that had been a symbol of his golden body. One that he had been tempted to eat, but had restrained himself because it felt too early. Now though, he was further along the process. The fruit had probably grown. It would be even more of temptation and was also the reason he hadn't checked his soul again. He didn't want to ruin it by giving in to his hunger and eating it. Just thinking about it made his mouth salivate, and he needed to swallow a few times to calm down. His instincts were telling him to eat it, but he couldn't trust it. It felt too much like his skills were trying to force his actions. Now, he reconsidered it. His own skills should make it so that it wouldn't harm him, but he didn't know what it would do. What would eating a part of his soul do? Could he even do that? He considered asking Luke, but felt like that would earn him a reprimand. Thoughts. Priscilla knew what he was thinking about, and she was the only other person who could really know the whole situation. Checking what she thought on the matter seemed prudent. I do not know. Do you think your skill would force the action into something positive? That is your choice. And if you had to choose? Mash replied quickly. Her leaving him with another question was not unexpected. And she would be honest in her words. Since she did not know, she felt it wasn't her decision to make. He knew the answer even before she explained it. If it was a matter of life and death, I would do everything possible to live. There are many kinds of power, the golden body is just one of many. He found himself smiling at that. It was an expected answer, one that made him ask a different question. Was this a life and death situation? Chapter 305, Allies and Enemies. Mash thought about it and realized that it probably wasn't a life or death situation. Even if there were people over his level, it wasn't like he would magically become that easy to kill. While he might not be able to win, he was probably able to survive. Even now, he could just escape into his world with as many people as possible. That alone would practically assure his own safety. His friends too, since Jill could teleport them there. The only problem with that was abandoning the city and the army to their fates. Which admittedly could be anything. He felt somewhat responsible because he had been the catalyst for everything that happened there, but he didn't need to be there. The city would change now, and regardless of what happened, most of the slaves would probably remain free. Not all of the northern kingdoms supported slavery, and every kingdom would take in skilled laborers. Which practically every slave was more than qualified at. The only people who would suffer were the strongest of the slaves. Those who would be greedily desired by the stronger kingdoms. Also, many people would probably be enslaved as they attempted to find a new place to live. They couldn't remain in the kingdom. Kings upheld their kingdoms with skills that were exclusive to them. Skills that would aid kingdoms in the long run. There was a lot known about king classes, and they were actually desired later by most rulers. Getting the class early often left people without skills to use in reference to solely themselves. The King of Jewels was an example of that. Whereas his king was more like the traditional one. Someone who had made his name in a combat class prior to taking the class that actually made him a king. Mash didn't have to think hard about which one was better. And the people here would probably agree. Mash turned as the space around him shifted slightly. Jill appeared a moment later and stepped away in abject horror. She yelped and almost fell but caught herself by putting her weight on her back leg. Her expression shifted from surprise to anger very quickly and then to confusion, as she spoke. Don't just stare at where I'm going to appear. And why are you in your dragon form anyway? The question surprised Mash a little. Had Priscilla not told them of the fight? Did she think it was unimportant? Well, it wasn't like anyone was likely to die in it, and that was probably the only criteria she cared about. He didn't bother mentioning it either. Red and Luke had both appeared too. They were flanking Jill and seemed similarly unsure about his appearance. What do you guys think we should do? I think running is the best strategy is running. I leave and draw their attention while you guys get the army into my portal. Then do the same with the rest of the city, and then come get me. Although I'll take any buffs I can get. Then why did we come here? We can help distract them. I would be able to help you avoid them. In fact, I can just teleport you back home, and then just get you if we need to. Mash considered Jill's response. That might actually be a better plan. It wasn't like these people would invade just to chase him down. But even that was unnecessary. He could just go to his world and wait until Jill got him for things. Wouldn't they just target you guys or the people we freed? That was the real concern that stopped him from agreeing instantly. It felt like he was just abandoning everything after creating a mess. He hated that idea more than the others. Mash, sometimes the best plan is just to leave. The people that are coming don't really know anyone other than you. Red said the words slowly. Her expression was worried, and her eyes darted over Mash. She was obviously trying to be delicate as if the statement was especially callous. He didn't really take any offense and chose to just nod. His plan had already been to run away, this would just speed up his escape. And it wasn't like he couldn't come back if they needed him. Honestly, his mind felt surprisingly clear. Maybe he was just tired. It was very possible considering everything that had happened. Mash let his transformation drop. His scales receded into his skin, as Lisa rejoined them. To his surprise, Jörg joined her. He wasn't enlarged or enraged and walked up to them with a smile. A smile that was far too friendly considering how hard Jörg had been trying to kill him earlier. I'm Jörg, it's good to meet you all. As for your plan, it's terrible. Lisa kind of told me about the situation. If Mash leaves now, the pursuers will definitely know and go after the slaves or the city. There was no doubt or room for questioning in the way he spoke. Everyone had questions though, but he held his hand up to forestall them. Let me explain. At least one of them will have a tracking skill to know if Mash is still nearby. As for the rest, if Mash flees faster than they can catch, then they will just turn to secondary tasks. Which in this case will be taking and holding the city. After they succeed, the rest of the kingdoms will cut up the city and take what they want. And some people will wind up as slaves again. And just like that, Mash's mind wasn't feeling clear anymore. It wasn't anger that filled him this time. Instead, he was just annoyed and disgusted. This whole continent was terrible. Luke wasn't as annoyed. His face was red with anger, and his words were harsh. Is this whole place that stupid? Don't they know what slavery is? Why would? Jörg spoke over Luke. Yeah, it's stupid. But it is my home, and it wasn't always this terrible. Why would they do it? Why do high-level people support it? Isn't it obvious? It's convenient and the highest-level people on the continent either support or tolerate slavery's existence. He wasn't angry as he spoke. Instead, his words carried his disappointment and disgrace. Lisa's expression mimicked the commander's, both of their faces were marred by shame. Mash didn't understand why, but he felt like he should keep his mouth shut. What do we do then? Even if Mash is strong, he can't fight a group of people that outlevel him. Our group couldn't do much either. Jill asked as everyone else couldn't find a way to break the awkward silence. Her voice reminded everyone of the urgency of the situation, and Yerg nodded along agreeably. Yeah, if you guys fight normally you will almost certainly die. Or wind up as slaves yourselves. No, that would be a bad choice too. We should try and be as violent as possible. Kill them while they underestimate you. You guys don't know it yet, but everyone can die even before their health hits zero. Yerg said it like it was some grand secret, but almost everyone back home knew that. A cut-off head was usually enough to kill just about anyone. Mash was sure there were exceptions. Red might already be able to survive if she had mana, not that anyone would test something like that. Health as an attribute usually meant things akin to durability and recovery. If the commander was being serious, he wanted to try and ambush the pursuers. Kill as many as possible before a fight can even break out. Hopefully, that would scare them off or get them to retreat. It wasn't a bad idea. As Mash thought about the plan, his eyes swung to Jill. He wasn't the only one either. Red and Luke were watching her with just as much enthusiasm. The meaning of those gazes was obvious. Got something means? Yerg looked almost pleased as he asked the question. Jill gave a very small nod, and she replied hesitantly. I do, but it's dangerous. I mean really dangerous, and depending on the size it could be bad. Just tell me what you need to do to set it up. He seemed to understand her reluctance, and just went to the heart of the matter. Jill then explained what she needed. Mash watched the conversation and saw the commander's smile grow more prominent. His eyes flashed with hope. Actually, it was something closer to resolve. Would that kill you? That question was directed at Mash, and he almost responded automatically. The question itself bothered Mash a little, but most of the things he did were pretty risky. Then he froze and gave it some more thought. It would probably kill him, but he had never tested it. And he did have his anti-magic, which should be able to suppress some of the damage. If he had some monster corpses and was in his treant form, there was a pretty good chance that he would be fine, so long as he wasn't directly next to one of her barriers. Luke could heal the damage too. I'd say there is a good chance I survive. Especially, if I'm past the range of the initial explosion. His words brought terror to his friends, who stared at him with disbelief. Good enough. We will work with a simple bait plan then. Thankfully, we don't need to waste time figuring out who their target is. Wait, we are not going to risk Mash's life like that. It's not worth it. Just let Jill blow up whoever she can. And not use Mash as live bait. To everyone's surprise, it was Lisa who protested the decision. She seemed horrified by the very thought. He saved us. We don't need him to die for us. Just let them go, we can fight for our freedom. Get as many people out as possible. They can take some with them at least. Lisa's words brought Mash back to reality. She was right, and he realized why Yerg would suggest a plan like that. He didn't care about Mash or any of them. It wasn't that he hated them, but he would risk everything if it meant he could help everyone. To him, it was a waste to try for anything less than everything. He wouldn't settle for it. Lisa was different. She wanted to save as many as she could, even if that ended up with her in chains again. Or she was resolved to die if it came to that. Mash realized that she was a friend and Yerg wasn't. With that, he nodded and rejected the plan too. Nope. I agree with her. That plan might kill me, and I don't want to die yet. But it did give me another idea. A significantly safer one too. Mash rarely came up with good plans, but he felt surprisingly good about his current one. The others saw his confidence and his friends looked at him with obvious doubt. Jill poked Luke and then proceeded to pinch one of her arms as Mash began to explain some of it. He had to rush, but it wasn't that long or complex. Honestly, it was probably simpler than Yerg's plan. That didn't mean it was worse. If anything, he felt like it was more likely to work. Chapter 306, Tricks and Traps. Mash frowned as he sat on a rather uncomfortable metal tile. It was terrible. The smooth silvery metal was plain, but there was something about the place that made his skin crawl. It might just be his previous memories. His last time in this place had been awful. It might still be the worst he had. He considered opening the portal closer to the exit, but he couldn't bring himself to do that. The room beside this one was hard to be in. Images had popped into his head when he had just peered inside. He remembered killing so many people, believing that there was no other choice. The people who had been mutated into something unnatural. Experiments for some demented child. No, he would stay where he was. The arena was larger and more appropriate for him anyway. The fact that he hadn't considered this before, made him feel kind of stupid. Although, it was far easier to just have Jill teleport their group back home, and he hadn't needed to consider alternatives. Now that he was worried about ferrying an entire kingdom across the continent, he realized that there was something else he could do. Also, there was something he could do to help them in the current situation. And that was to make a bridge between home and him. While he could only make one portal, this dungeon had another entrance. One that had been secured and locked by his brother after the orphanage incident. The orphanage was in the middle of the city and a portal there essentially functioned as a path to the city. He had to inform his brother and the general, only to find out that they had somehow locked the dungeon. It would take them a little bit to free it, but that was fine. Mash was more distracted by something else. His gaze aimed out of the dungeon, through the portal, and into a snowy field. The signs of his previous fight were there, and cold air leaked in quickly. The army had mostly dispersed, fleeing into the surroundings. Mash wondered how far they were from the home. It would take them a little bit to travel on foot, but there wasn't much else that could be done. His friends were escorting the army but were waiting for him to call them back. Mash still didn't know if he would need to. His brother would be here soon, along with some others who could actually fight against people above his level. They would still be late, so he needed to buy them as much time as possible. Which was the reason behind leaving the portal wide open. Closing it would just lead the pursuers to turn toward the city. Which would defeat the purpose entirely. On the other hand, leaving the portal open would probably still work for the tracking skills. He very much doubted that they would enter the portal voluntarily, but they would certainly investigate it. So, he sat on the floor letting cold air brush against his face, as he searched the sky for his pursuers. It was late at night, so it was kind of pointless. They wouldn't be leaving a trail as he had, and his night vision was only slightly better than a normal person's. No, this was merely an act. He just pretended like he was paying active attention. Jill was the only one really looking for them. She alone hid among the trees and waited for their arrival. Her skills would help her find them, even before they became visible to him. And if they spotted her fist, she would know and could just teleport away. They're here. Jill's message surprised him. Actually, got him to look around now. Gaze past the trees to try and see them, only to realize he couldn't. They were basically just invisible. He only managed to notice something was off when Priscilla pointed out the way the snow turned oddly. Stealth was probably difficult to manage with all the snow, though he hadn't noticed the people in question until they were a little over 100 feet away. And he still couldn't see them. All he saw was a vague outline of a group of people as the snow bounced off their skin. Whatever invisibility they were using was only visual, it seemed. Not that it mattered once they got into his domain. Mash smiled at them, showing his sharpened teeth in what he hoped was a menacing grin. He had just killed a king, and he figured it would be more intimidating if he acted like he was confident. He wasn't dumb enough to think that they didn't have an estimate for his level, but it would be inaccurate. They especially wouldn't know how many he had gained from killing the king or the evolution of the skills that he had acquired recently. That would be his biggest advantage. He decided to provoke the pursuers, by waving at them. The grin he had paired with the casual gesture, let them know he was aware of their presence. And if both of those failed, he greeted them happily. Hello. Sorry, but I don't think I'll invite you in. The invisibility that was on them didn't drop, but Mash noticed the people stop before his portal. It seemed like the plan was working. The group was clearly hesitating. They couldn't know all the details of his skills. Plus, he had given his words some serious thought. They weren't complex, but it was the kind of thing that sounded creepy. Plus, he could control his facial expressions easily with muscle control. It kind of worked. One of the groups seemed to ignore all common sense and dashed into the portal without hesitation. Their invisibility skill couldn't keep up with the sudden movement. And Mash got a look at his first attacker. A woman clearly older than him, but with a youthful face despite it. She had short white hair that was cut close to her scalp. It added to her childish appearance despite the color. Her dark brown eyes were cold and vacant, as she closed the distance in an instant. She lunged with a blade in hand, moving so fast that he almost couldn't react. Her body blurred into a black shadow as her dark leather armor seemed to draw in the surrounding light. Mash only noticed the blade because of his domain, otherwise, that would have blended in with her hands perfectly. Despite noticing the blade, he barely managed to avoid the lunge. She was moving faster than he could, even with his forms. Currently, only his muscles had been changed, keeping his appearance completely normal. However, his reaction speed was inhumanly fast, and he barely managed to avoid getting his head lopped off. Her attack had been an echo of the general's plan. Mash sent a message to Jill as he dodged to the left. "Do it now." His neck was cut, but it wasn't deep, and the wound closed quickly. Although it managed to paint his neck red. Some of the other people had taken that moment to enter the portal as well, and Mash let the portal collapse. It just fell apart, trapping him with around 5 of the attackers. Surprisingly, it had been the one that had cut him that reacted fastest. She almost made it back to the portal, but it closed just in front of her face. Mash had barely noticed her backtrack. It must have been a skill with how her body just seemed to slide backward. Thankfully it didn't go through space. He wanted to trap as many people as he could, and she was definitely one of those who outleveled him. And while she couldn't go through space, Jill could. Jill appeared beside Mash. She had a smirk on her face, as she looked over the group. She spoke as the group noticed her arrival. "Pick up for one." She spoke softly, as the woman by the gate seemed to catch on. Everyone in the room finally understood what was happening too. They were too slow to do anything. Mash just kept his attention on the white-haired woman across the room. To his surprise, he caught her smiling. It caused Mash to sweat, though it only lasted for an instant as the world around him blurred. He appeared within the forest. Snow replaced the metal he had been sitting on. Red, Luke, and Lisa stood around nervously. Relief crossed their faces in unison, and Mash smiled at them nervously. He rubbed at his neck, revealing to Luke that he wasn't really hurt. The blood stuck to his hand, and his voice shook a little as he spoke. "That was close." It was probably the closest he had been to death in a while. And it was similar too, as he remembered getting thrown off a cliff with his throat slit. There was a difference though. That time he had survived on luck. Now, it was because of his preparation and skill. Luke offered Mash a hand and healed him pointlessly too. The warm sensation of the magic filled him as he stood. "How many did you get?" Mash thought back to the room and counted the people he could remember. Well, he could only think of the white-haired woman. Honestly, he didn't think he would be able to forget her easily and told Priscilla to warn his brother. He replied to Red's question as he got up. 11 of them. I think one was over level 150. She was the one that did this." He rubbed the side of his neck as he mentioned it. "Can I ask what she looked like? I might know who she was." Lisa asked the question. She sounded uncomfortable and hesitant, as if she wasn't sure if she was allowed to participate in the conversation. Mash nodded and had Priscilla send her an image of the woman. It would be better than a verbal description, and he had told her about Priscilla when he shared the plan earlier. She was still a bit startled and let out a squeak as an image was placed into her mind. It only worked because she accepted it, but it could still be jarring. Although, her reaction wasn't because of the magic. Her mouth hung open as she shut her eyes and whispered out her next words. "This is bad." There was a heavy worry behind those words. Those 3 words would probably have elicited worry in other people, but Mash simply nodded along. His plan had worked far better than he had expected, and he felt like it needed some more chaos to properly fit him. The others didn't seem all that concerned either. Lisa's eyes darted over the group in disbelief. "Aren't you worried?" Red shrugged her shoulders and spoke, sounding a little bored by the dramatic reaction Lisa had. She probably didn't like the fact that Lisa still hadn't revealed the woman's identity. "We are, but this is around what we expected. We always think that our plans will go wrong in some way. Literally, nothing has ever worked out as planned. Now, can you tell us why we should be worried?" Chapter 307, Bricks. Mash rode with the army, patiently waiting for the pursuers to follow them. His eyes crawled over the skies behind them. He kept checking the ground too, looking for footsteps in the snow. Even invisible, they would leave a trail with all the snow around. Again, though his watch was secondary to Jill's. Meanwhile, Lisa explained who the white-haired woman was. She wasn't important in the way that he had assumed. The assassin wasn't a member of a royal family, nor was she part of an accomplished noble house of any kind. Instead, her fame came from the singular connection her class had granted her. And it was one that did cause Mash to sweat and could explain why the hunters weren't on their backs already. They were likely just as worried as Lisa was. After all, the person whom he trapped within a dungeon was the suspected child of a dragon. A rumor like that wouldn't pop up without some genuine truth to it. Dragons, for all their mystery, were largely known to be petty creatures. It made people hesitant to use their name or visage in any way. If this woman made this claim openly and was famous for it, there was likely something to it. Lisa believed it and so did the general. Apparently, there were people that had seen her beside the dragon. Mash doubted it very much. It wasn't that he thought it was impossible, he just figured that someone getting support from a dragon would be at a much higher level. He had said as much, but it didn't change Lisa's mind. His friends also chose to believe Lisa, but only because he was who he was. Whether it was true or not, he decided to warn his brother. It was a small precaution, as Arthur wasn't really planning on harming the people. He was just there to capture them and prepare to funnel several thousand people into a new city. Mash didn't think it would all happen so easily. His plan had worked through. The rest of the trip was surprisingly empty. The pursuers didn't chase after him. While he didn't understand why he didn't particularly care. The fact that they didn't attack him, or the army was to his benefit. When you get to the city, open the portal again. We have worked out a deal with most of the northern kingdoms. The message came from General Urkish through his brother. Well, that explained the lack of pursuit. How? Mash didn't understand why they would go from a bloodthirsty assassination, to completely ignoring him. An entire kingdom and your life aren't worth losing the 11 high-leveled individuals you had captured. Even if we weren't going to kill them. The northern kingdoms are too divided to be willing to lose their most powerful individuals. The answer was disappointing and blunt. Mash didn't really get the tone that the general had used as the message was constructed by Priscilla, but he hoped that she was as disgusted as he was. It was the kind of mentality only a kingdom could have. To look at two people and decide that one was worth more than the other was wrong. Although, if kingdoms regularly fought one another, they would care about something like that. Now that the deal was made, he didn't worry as much about any assassins. He still kept watch, unable to trust kingdoms that tolerated slavery. Even after everything, Mash fundamentally hated this place for allowing it. The one time he lost his ability to choose his class had been awful. Slaves had to live their whole lives never having a choice. His blood felt hot whenever he thought about it. While he had wanted to go and help Timur, he didn't want to stay here any longer. Next time he decided to travel somewhere, he would check their laws more carefully. For now, he tried messaging Timur. It won't work. He either destroyed the imitation or placed it into a storage space. Either way, the connection has been severed. Mash thought about it but could understand the decision. Whatever Timur thought of Mash, they had only known each other for half a day. And Mash was considered a terrorist now, but that didn't seem to count for much as they were letting him go with the better part of an entire kingdom for the sake of a couple of people. Mash shared the information with everyone, the soldiers included. They celebrated their supposedly guaranteed freedom. The sour thoughts clung to Mash despite the celebration, which mostly just involved crying and hugging. He didn't like the deal though, and he looked around for something to distract him. He saw Jurg and Lisa and decided it was a good time to learn about their classes. Lisa had offered to share information about her class, and Jurg seemed amiable enough even if they couldn't see eye to eye. Plus, their classes had some similarities. His approach was noticed. It wasn't like he was hiding, but most of the soldiers kept making very obvious glances toward him and his friends. The fight with Jurg was only part of the reason for their gazes. The soldiers knew that they were free now mostly because of Mash and the others. As such, the soldiers approached them often. To thank them and offer them one gift or another. All of which he refused. Few were unhappy with Mash's decision to stop the complete slaughter of everyone that had kept slaves. Most were just glad to be free and to have some assurance of that freedom now. Mash got a surreal sense of having experienced this before. Multiple times at that. He shrugged them off now and spoke to the two as he got close. Hey Lisa, want to talk about classes some more? Lisa's eyes seemed to sparkle a little when he asked. Really? I mean, I would like to. She was really fascinated by the subject, even more so than Mash. He was more interested in the class system as a whole. Her interest was clearly directed more toward the classes themselves. A small difference but one that made talking about the subject interesting to both of them. Jurg did not seem as interested as he tried to get out of the conversation. You two have fun with that, I think I will go join the celebrations. Mash spoke up trying to get a little from the man. Wait, can you tell me what your class is called? And the domain skill? Jurg shifted his head from side to side as he debated answering. He gave Mash a careful look over before responding. I'll tell you if you let me and my army do as it pleases. Really, you still want to do that? Just talk about it with the general when you meet her. Mash frowned, not really wanting to rehash the argument again. He didn't care all that much either way, but he felt better doing as the general had instructed. Plus, he was fairly certain that the people involved wouldn't be getting much mercy from his kingdom either. Mash wasn't actually even sure if what he was doing would even help those people. Honestly, letting the soldiers kill them might be more merciful in the long run. Yerg seemed to get something from Mash's expression and grunted. I will do that. My class is Apex Beast Master, and the skill is called Predator's Aura. Mash was surprised to get an answer. Especially, because Yerg had said it while walking away from them. He thought about it and asked Lisa about it. How is he a Beast Master? His class lets him command beasts that are weaker than him. He can't force them to do anything, but most creatures tend to listen when a predator tells them to run. Why did you call his aura a domain? Lisa answered his question swiftly and asked one herself. Mash had told her a little about his class and had mentioned his domain briefly before. When we met, his skill challenged mine for dominance. Something along that line at least. It didn't work and I kind of just stopped his skill altogether. He still remembered the feeling of crushing Yerg's aura. It had been odd at first, but he adjusted quickly. Interestingly, it had been kind of like glaring at someone, though in a more spiritual sense. He didn't bother trying to describe it to Lisa. There was no good way to describe it unless she had a similar skill. Thinking about that, he decided to ask her about her class. Do you have an aura? Or something like it? And what did you do to the fireball earlier? She nodded, replying happily. As I mentioned before, I'm a mana dancer. The skill I used for the fireball was actually a combination of skills. The first skill I used was mana signature. It lets me mark a spell with my mana. Although, it is invisible to everyone else. I saw it with my domain. Mash interjected with that piece of information. It was a little rude, but she seemed interested in his additions as well. What did it look like? Here, I can just show you. He thought about explaining the weird symbol he had seen but just had Priscilla help him in recreating it. He could have sent her an image like the woman, but the symbol was simple enough that he could make it out of wood easily. He held up the strange symbol. To him, it just seemed like a random series of interconnected lines. It's from an old dwarven language. They used symbols to represent things. It means happiness. My mother had shown it to me, and it just stuck around. That's not really important to you though. She had grown a little melancholic as she talked about her mother, and Mash wished he had something to say. He didn't try though, and just let her move the subject to something else. The skill marks any spell. And lets me use my other skills on it freely. The other skill I used to contain the fireball, is my unique skill, Partner of Mana. The mark changes the mana of a spell to match my signature, and Partner of Mana, lets me manipulate it to my dance. She paused as if waiting for Mash to ask for something, and he obliged with an obvious question. So, that means you can just steal mana from it. She looked a little disappointed at the question, and Mash raised an eyebrow at her frown. Most people ask if I can use the magic later. I could kind of see what you did with my domain. You kind of absorbed the mana in a similar way to one of my skills. But I'm assuming you can't replicate the magic, right? Lisa sighed a little, but it was clearly an intentional gesture. She was still enjoying the conversation. Yeah, you got it. I could redirect the attack if I wanted to, but I can't just use it whenever. I essentially just turn it back into its raw state and absorb that. That's still useful. What other skills do you have? Lisa's gaze seemed to freeze now, and she spoke a little dully. That's it for really interesting skills. My other ones are blander since my class is fairly generic. The sleep skill you saw earlier is an advanced soothe and charm skill, known as a dancer's pull. It lets me influence people to a different state of mind, but they need to already want it to some degree. Everyone tends to want to sleep. Other than that, I have general skills to improve my attributes, appearance, and perception. Is that how you saw through my facade, back when we met? Now that attention was brought to the subject, Mash realized he really wanted to know how she had known. Lisa shook her head slightly. I didn't exactly see through it, but I could see that your rhythm didn't match your actions. Rhythm. It's kind of like your aura or presence. Imagine that you constantly emit something like that. I can feel that from everyone. It was really useful for the king. For making more slaves. Her voice grew quieter, and again Mash felt like he didn't have anything to say. He imagined what Priscilla might say to him. Now, you can use it for whatever you want. Help whoever you want, even yourself. He regretted the last part immediately. It was something Priscilla might tell him, but it probably wasn't encouraging in the right way to everyone. It seemed to lighten the mood though, as Lisa started to laugh. It quickly grew louder and a little hysteric. Chapter 308, Dragon's Daughter. Mash's return to the mountain city was pleasant. He enjoyed talking with Lisa, and they spent pretty much the whole journey talking about their classes. Mash almost revealed things about the others' classes, but Priscilla stopped him from doing that. It happened more than once. Now that the mountain was in sight, the conversation shifted toward his portals and what would happen in the city. Yerk and the others had joined for that discussion. Not that there was much to talk about. His portal would essentially open a door straight to the capital. Like that they strolled into the city, already prepared to empty it of all its inhabitants. Their re-entry this time wasn't through one of the narrow hallways. There was a much larger underground passageway that took them near the center of the city. He hadn't noticed it before as it was literally hidden by the city's streets. The stone had to be physically moved aside to let them walk up and into the city. For such a well-protected city, he had not had any trouble getting around them. This time, he just walked in, though the city was not quite the same anymore. The city hadn't remained idle during their journey, and Mash saw smoke coming from many parts of the city. Buildings had obviously been raided, and the central 3 buildings had been uprooted. All that remained of the slavery was a mass of bricks. The very ground around it was littered with coins and gems. Not one person had even tried to pick them up, and Mash felt the same. That money was tainted as could be. The Colosseum and auction house were similarly in tatters, though he had never actually scoped either building out. And now he never would, not that he really wanted to either. The army's arrival into the city didn't go unnoticed, and Mash rushed to open his portal. He knew that the army wouldn't stay grouped for very long, and he wanted to get his brother and the general here as soon as possible. They had already let him know that they were ready, so Mash only had to open the portal. The wooden arch grew from the ground as Lisa went to find out what had happened within the city. Darkness filled the archway for a second before revealing the dungeon. The first thing Mash saw was Arthur and the woman with white hair speaking to one another. General Urkish was standing with them, but she was looking straight at him when the portal opened. She had somehow noticed the portal before it had fully appeared. The wooden archway was fairly obvious, but he knew that it didn't form in the same way on the other side. While it took a few seconds to grow fully for him, it would just suddenly appear to the people here. It didn't grow from the ground, it just popped into the dungeon. The general still knew though and stared at him with an expression that made Mash quickly step aside. He hid behind the arch, glad that the portal didn't function both ways. Thus, he waved Yerk and the rest through the portal, choosing to use them to avoid speaking with Urkish. Whatever she had in mind, he was sure he would owe the kingdom something for all of this. It wasn't that he would avoid taking responsibility for it. Rather he just didn't want to do it right away. It worked as Yerk approached the Urkish. She wasn't hard to identify, plus she was a famous general and Yerk was a military man. He would probably know any significant power in the other kingdoms. Mash let him take the general's attention, and he tried to slink to the back of the growing crowd. More and more people were gathering around the portal as the remaining guards led them through. People kept glancing at him. Somehow everyone seemed to know exactly who he was, and Mash saw more than a few people bow or nod to him. Some even dropped to their knees in a strange prayer. Mash pretended not to see them and let his eyes scan the broken city. "You can't avoid what you are." The voice was soft and breathy. A whisper from someone trying to sound mysterious. At first, he thought it was Jill, but realized with some alarm that this person hadn't teleported. Rather they had moved impossibly quickly. So fast that even his senses were slightly delayed in identifying the person. He tried not to let it show, but his shoulders twitched from his surprise. "Hello, I'm Mash, and you are?" The white-haired woman walked beside him. He tried to act composed but it was just an act. He knew who she was and was well aware of the fact that she could kill him. Especially now, while he wasn't in any of his forms. Her voice carried to him, and he could tell that it wasn't going anywhere else. I assumed you would know. However, I am Whitney. Now, it's my turn to ask you a question. Who marked you?" Mash didn't even react to the question. The composed act was maintained by a moment of ignorance. He didn't understand it at first, but then his mind processed each word more carefully. Once it clicked, he turned inward in panic. Priscilla should know if there had been some kind of skill or magic used on him. How does she know about them? Not them, she only mentioned a single. And I believe she is inclined to answer your question if you ask. She clearly volunteered herself for this conversation. He took the advice in stride and decided to ask openly. Although he gave her an answer, revealing the mark that he thought she could detect. The world carrier's mark had been designed to hide him, so he doubted she was able to notice that one. I got it from this snake thing. It was a curse. Now how do you know about the mark, and are you marked? She sighed a little, her face revealing her dissatisfaction. That was 2 questions, though I guess we are done with the game. No one ever plays it properly. Does no one know how to properly trade questions anymore? Despite how cold and silent she had been before, Whitney was none of those things now. She was overly dramatic and played into the stories he had heard earlier. He had to believe it was an act but let her play it out as he waited for an answer. And you have stopped listening. I guess the adopted daughter of a dragon can't compare to someone who is part dragon. To answer your question, I also have a mark. One of its functions is to find others with them. Does your mark not let you do the same? Mash missed a step as he listened to her words. He didn't fall but stopped and stared at the woman's back as she took another step forward. Then she performed a grand twirl, even though she didn't have any loose clothing or hair to sway with the gesture. He ignored the pointless display and stammered out his question. Wait. What do you mean by part dragon? And how would you even know that? He could have denied it, but it was probably pointless. Nobody would guess something like that. She didn't really need to answer either. The obvious one was that her class was related to dragons somehow. That gave some credence to the rumors. I'm assuming that was rhetorical. If not, the answer is my class. She said it with a smug look of satisfaction. Whitney seemed to enjoy controlling the conversation, which Mash decidedly didn't like. He didn't care for the implicit power dynamic that comes from an exchange like this and would rather just get the answer for his questions. He very much wished he was talking to Lisa instead. Although he wanted to know more and tried to press the woman for more information. What class is that? Or just the skill if you don't want to tell me that? Whitney stared at Mash. She seemed most unprepared for a direct question like that. Classes and skills were usually private things, not that Mash cared much for that tradition. In his mind, it was dumb and would cause more confusion in the long run. Although, he had to admit that there was some advantage to keeping some secrets. This scrutiny just seemed excessive though. The name of the class didn't reveal that much. My class is Chimeric Vagabond. He stepped up to her and spoke in a slightly quieter voice. Even if he didn't see it as the biggest secret, there was no reason to let anyone that was passing by hear them. Fine. My class is called Dragon's Fang. Now, how are you part dragon? What did you do to earn that ability? She didn't lower her voice, but her strange sound manipulation was still active. Somehow, she was speaking only to him, and it wasn't magical. Well, it didn't utilize any mana that he could detect. Her gaze had shifted too. When she asked her questions, she said with a hint of desperation. It was a desire that she had probably been chasing her whole life. Mash felt like telling her that he ate part of a dragon would be a mistake. Especially, if she had been marked by a dragon. He could imagine the snake giving him a chunk of its flesh in some kind of ruse to make his life harder. I'm a chimera. I mean that literally, my class turned me into one. As for how I got it, I kind of just ate a bunch of monsters. How though? Was it from your mark? She was quick to ask another question. Mash considered it for a second and wondered if his class was a product of his mark and not the dragon flesh. He had assumed that was the reason, but maybe it had been the snake that had forced him into the class. It was a possibility. Maybe? Also, who gave you your mark? Was it your dragon? Not my dragon. My father. But no, they did not give me the mark. I received it from a very intelligent spider. That was a sufficiently vague and mysterious answer. Which also told him absolutely nothing relevant to the marks other than there was some grand spider somewhere. Okay, what does having a mark even mean? I was just given mine randomly. Finally, he said something that caught her off guard. Seriously? Well, that is cruel. The marks do more than you think. They make it more likely for you to get more unique classes and skills. It affects those who spend a considerable amount of time around you as well. As far as I was told, it is meant to mark champions, kings, and leaders. Why? After hearing what the mark did, he didn't understand why they would be given. What did those beings gain from giving someone else power? I don't know. I have done some suspicions and did some research, but I want to hear what you think first. Mash weighed getting some answers with some of the secrets he thought he knew. Ultimately, it was the fact that neither really knew the truth that made him decide to share what he knew. Thus began a rather long explanation about what he thought of the world owners and what their purpose was. Chapter 309, Additions. Mash didn't tell Whitney about his own world, or the worlds he had changed or ruined through sharing his ideas. He did tell her what he understood and how he came to those conclusions. She participated as a sounding board and interjected her own beliefs. Mash was a little surprised to see how much her personality differed from his initial impression of her. Although that had been skewed by her attempting to separate his head from his body. He realized part of her openness was because she wanted some information too. Both on his mark and on how he got his class. She was desperate whenever it came around to discussing that. It wasn't hard to figure out that she didn't want to be human anymore. That was strange to him, but she probably had her reasons. He gave some of it away as it wasn't a huge secret. Though he did speak fairly vaguely, not revealing what exactly he had eaten for it. On the other hand, she talked a lot about the marks and what she believed or learned about them. She didn't give up on how exactly she came across her information. Either way, he was eager to learn what he could. She had explained that it was probably more of a game than anything else. Perhaps an attempt to create more individuals that were at their level. Mash didn't give the second theory much likelihood, but the first seemed somewhat correct. The snake at least had given him a mark for entertainment. Although the world carrier had given him a mark to block the snake. Mash couldn't believe it had been done without some other purpose in mind. A power struggle between the two would make sense. The other theory she had was a little more interesting. She believed that the marks were one of the only ways for something that powerful to gain more power. That there was some relation between their relative power and the marks they had given out seemed reasonable. Then came the obvious question of how and why, since Mash technically owned the world himself, he wondered if he could do it too. He would look more closely at his marks later. Maybe he could copy it or something. It was something to do for later. For now, he needed to get out of the conversation. Whitney was nice and talking to her wasn't boring, but it was annoying. She liked being dramatic, and that grew cumbersome quickly. Especially when he was genuinely interested in the subject. Also, the others were looking for him now. Whitney was in the middle of asking another question about the origin of his class, and he cut in rudely now that he had an excuse. I need to go, the others are looking for me. I don't think we will see each other soon, so goodbye. She paused in her question, and her gaze washed over him. Her eyes narrowed in obvious suspicion, but she didn't push him. Oh, I don't know about that. I think I'll come to visit soon enough. And I think you should try and level as fast as you can. Her words were accompanied by a not-so-subtle smirk. She didn't give him the time to come up with a witty response and disappeared with the same speed as earlier. It was an excessively dramatic exit, which he thought fit her perfectly. He didn't give her words that much credence though, since he was already planning on leveling quickly either way. Plus, he couldn't imagine that she would go out of her way to meet him. Mash didn't have to try very hard to find the others since Priscilla could lead him there easily. He wondered if she told the others where he was. No. The response came as soon as he thought about the question. It was a little bit surprising to hear that she didn't tell the others, but it wasn't really relevant either. He would probably tell them, but he wasn't planning on doing anything with the information just yet. It didn't take long to meet up with the others. They were just standing around the portal waiting for all the people to go through. Mash noticed the general was with them, and her head snapped towards him when he came into sight. He didn't try to run again. This wasn't something he could avoid any longer. Also, the general gave him a look that told him not to try. Has Whitney left? Mash was going to apologize for avoiding her earlier, but the general's question blocked it. He paused and nodded after considering what Whitney had said. I think so, at least as far as I could tell. She nodded and spoke to the entire group. Arthur kept looking at him though, and Mash felt like he was nervous or concerned. He naturally grew tense because of it. The general's words came out flatly. I need to tell you about your new status within the kingdom. While it is just you, Mash, your whole group will have to deal with it. First, you need to understand that public opinion and the official declaration are very different. Your brother insisted that we reveal as much of the truth as the king would allow. Which has basically turned you into a hero even without the class for it. Although there is also the official declaration that you are a terrorist. A king killer again accepting that you lack the class for it as well. Mash heard the words but didn't really understand them. What does that actually mean? He didn't mean to sound like he was angry or alarmed, but it came out that way. He was just confused by the duplicitous explanation. She didn't react to his tone though and responded normally. It means formally you would be treated as any criminal. Banned from any of the major cities, guilds, and similar establishments. However, your unofficial status as a hero would likely mean that you would receive the opposite treatment anywhere within the kingdom. Again, Mash found that these words didn't equate to much. It sounded like nothing really changed for him. The general wasn't done with the explanation either. Mostly, you will be treated as a hero. Famous for saving an entire kingdom from an evil king. However, the kingdom can't formally protect you if the North attempts to capture you. If they choose to send assassins and the like, we can do little. It also means you can't rely on us for much aid like you did today. All of this is only for the benefit of peace, so if war breaks out naturally all of these policies will fall apart. Mash didn't think much of the comments. If anything, he was most bothered by the fame. He didn't want to be treated like a hero. Red was more concerned, although not about him as she responded to something else. War with the North? You make it sound like that is a possibility. It is considering that we are going to enter a war with another kingdom soon. The North could easily use it as an opportunity to join. We would be forced to fight on two fronts and any other kingdom might also join in that situation. The general didn't seem to mind sharing this information with them, and he knew why. Now, they would be involved in the war regardless of what started it because they created this situation. Mash especially felt like he owed them that much. Do we have no allies? What did we do? Jill spoke as if she couldn't trust the general. Mash nodded along to her questions. We have established peace between all of the major kingdoms, but peace is a fragile thing for us. Every kingdom is on a timeline. When the king dies the kingdom will either need to quickly fill the spot with someone of around the same level or just collapse and fall to another kingdom. Our kingdom has been lucky to have rulers rise through strength. However, we are currently without someone who could replace the king. The other kingdoms know this, which is why they wouldn't ignore it if an opportunity presented itself. The general stopped, but his brother didn't let it end there. Also, no, we are not the most well-liked kingdom. We are harsh on certain classes and groups that the other kingdoms openly support. The slavers you encountered are one such example. The current king especially has many enemies. And that is not your fault, Mash. Despite what the general claims, none of you are obligated to fight if a war starts. We would have helped with this situation, either way, not to mention that several individuals over level 100 have joined our kingdom now. Arthur's words didn't match the general's expression, but his glare stopped her from saying anything. Mash understood what his brother meant, but he still felt responsible for the whole thing. If war did come, he would do his part. They talked a little more after that. The general and his brother argued a little about the war and some stuff related to all the new people. Mash and the rest left the two to their discussion and talked about what to do next. He told them that they couldn't visit Timor anymore. Which left them with few other options. There weren't that many high-leveled monster zones within the kingdom. There were a couple of dungeons, but if a war started while they were in a dungeon, it would be a problem. Especially if there was a lot of alteration to the flow of time. They could still go so long as they made the right preparations. Jill's ability to teleport and Mash's ability to make exits made it so that they could enter and exit as they pleased. A plan slowly came together when he told them what Whitney had said. They would enter a dungeon without seriously trying to complete it. Instead, they would just go to gain levels as quickly as possible. That way they wouldn't really be losing out on anything by leaving and re-entering. It would probably need to be a monster or labyrinth dungeon for their plan to work, as those tended to reset upon re-entry. They stood apart from the rest of the people as the final person entered the portal. Lisa approached them, as they approached the portal. She had a fake smile on. He could recognize it now that he had seen her real smile. Lisa seemed to realize what she was doing and shook the smile off her face. When she spoke, her voice carried her hesitation. I heard what you were talking about, and can I go with you guys? Mash was going to ask why but was cut off by Red, who accepted her without question. Of course, we would be happy to get someone at your level. But don't you want to rest for a few days? Red didn't hesitate at all. Lisa released an obviously held breath. She had been tensed, and Mash knew that him just asking her why would have been bad. Although he didn't understand it either. He would have expected her to want to live peacefully now that she was free and safe. She shook her head slowly as she responded. No, I want to level and get rid of this class. She smiled slightly as Red nodded, and Jill hugged her. Mash and Luke nodded too. Now they just needed to figure out where they wanted to go. Mash was especially eager as he was close to his next advancement. Chapter 310, Grinding Gold. The next 2 days flashed by in a blur of research. Mash had been restricted to his house, and he was happy to oblige with it. He had seen and heard several of the rumors surrounding him. None of them made him want to leave the house. He did get some visitors, in the form of several members of the royal family. All but the king himself had come by to give him their support and congratulations. That only led to others wanting to mimic them. Before the first day ended, he had escaped to the training area, and just focused on his golden body. Which didn't really get him anywhere. As it turned out, he wasn't really able to grow with just 2 days of training. While he was busy avoiding the public eye, the others spent that time on research. Finding a dungeon that fit all of their requirements was annoying. Even after 2 days of searching, Red only found one dungeon that would work. And even then, the dungeon wasn't perfect. The monsters within were weaker than they wanted, and the dungeon itself wasn't exactly pleasant. With all of that said, it was the one they had chosen since Jill and Luke hadn't found better options. The plan was set, and it didn't take long to get to the dungeon in question. The dungeon wasn't far, and their trip had been uneventful. It was located in the broken remains of a town. The town itself had been called Waterberry, for the blueberries that had grown on the bushes in the area. They had passed a few of those bushes on their journey. Mash had eaten a couple of berries too. The others couldn't since they were extremely poisonous. Luke could have healed them, but none of them felt particularly inclined to consume poison. Mash didn't care, and he was somewhat rewarded for it. They were sweeter than almost any fruit he had ever tried. The first bite he had taken had been surprising enough to make him spit it out. Although, the flavor had grown on him quickly. He made sure to grab some of the seeds to grow in his world. Other than the bushes there wasn't much to see. All that remained of the town was a few broken buildings and the vaguest semblance of a wall surrounding them all. A couple of scattered pieces of stone jutted out of the dirt and revealed the shape of the town. Unsurprisingly, the town was completely empty. The surrounding grasslands had some low-level monsters now, though none actually entered the town's territory. The dungeon had frightened off the weaker monsters. Normally, Mash would be thrilled to be entering a new dungeon. But even he couldn't smile as he stared at the dungeon's entrance. Unlike the other portals he had seen, this one lay atop the ground. It functioned as a hole that they would need to jump into. The grass around it was wet and the dirt had all turned to mud. Only Lisa seemed genuinely excited by the dungeon, and she impatiently tapped her foot as she waited for Mash. He was supposed to be the first one in. Admittedly, he was a little excited about the dungeon too. Even if the dungeon itself was a little unpleasant, it would provide him with the levels needed to advance. That thought spurred him to action. The dungeon was well recorded, so he knew what to expect as he dropped into it. He stepped from the solid ground and jumped into the hole. It moved him like Jill's teleportation skill, which did not feel natural. It was weird to know that he was falling without feeling like he was. He couldn't even really react as his feet splashed against some water. The water quickly rose to cover his knees, and Mash instantly cut off his sense of smell. The water was a sickly shade of green. He could barely see the stone underneath. Without his domain, he would have tried swimming. He shuddered at the thought of swimming in the water. As his eyes fully adjusted to the darkness, he couldn't help but gag a little at what he saw. The dungeon was aptly called the used sewer. The walls had stains that he distinctly did not want to think about, and he ignored the disgustingly thick feeling of the water. He seriously considered leaving. This would not be a good representation of a dungeon for Lisa. Before he could come to a decision, the others dropped into the water around him. They were all wearing masks that had been drenched in perfume, but there was little that could be done to completely stop the smell. Several of them made gagging noises. The Kraken's lair would have been better than this. Jill grumbled as she tried futilely to push the smell away. We can't breathe underwater. Nor are we capable of fighting a Kraken. It's supposed to be over level 200. Red responded flatly, although Mash noticed that she was just as desperate in her attempts to brush the air away from her face. Still. We could have done something. Jill mumbled back, but even she couldn't make that claim confidently. Lisa interrupted their argument. Is it safe to just stand here? I believe you mentioned that this dungeon had a lot of monsters. Her head darted back and forth as she looked down the hallway. She didn't really seem particularly bothered by the situation though. Her excitement had dimmed. There were only 2 directions for them to go. This was a pretty common starting location for the dungeon, so they knew what to do. It's fine. We should be fine in the starting areas. Plus, I would sense anything if it got close. Mash responded as he observed his surroundings. His domain let him get a better feel for the way the hallway curved. The dungeon was designed with a circular pattern, and the first thing they needed to find was the curvature of that circle. The center of the dungeon was where the exit was. It curves around like this. Mash swung his arm down the length of the hallway so that the others could see. Mash started trudging through the water and ignored the moments when he stepped on something that wasn't stone. The dungeon would actually be simple to clear for them. All they had to do was head toward the center of the circle and kill any monsters along the way. Mash was fairly certain they could complete it within the day if they wanted to. They weren't going to though. This dungeon would reset every time it was entered so long as they hadn't cleared it. If they did clear it, they would need to wait till tomorrow to enter it again. No, their plan was to get to the end and teleport out. Then they would start over from the beginning. This is where the unpopularity of the dungeon helped them. It didn't take long to run into their first pack of monsters. The creatures in question were some strange fish that scrapped against the ground. They had long poisonous whiskers and were the weakest of what they would find here. These monsters survived by eating the grime of the floor. Other than the poison, the creatures posed little threat. They could bite and had sharp teeth for that purpose. The fish weren't able to do any real damage considering the group's defenses. Before long all of the monsters had been killed. Mash hadn't gained any levels. Lisa gained 1 level but no one else did. They weren't really expecting to gain levels that quickly though. However, Mash was able to do something else with the monster bodies. He let a wooden mouth eat one, but the rest he absorbed into his body with chimeric reconstruction. It was the most consistent way to develop his golden body. The rest of the day progressed just like that. There were other monsters, but nothing that was truly a threat. The dungeon was designed in such a way that the boss at the end was the main reason for the level rating of it. Most of the monsters they found would be between 60 to 100. The worst thing they had to deal with was some particularly nasty-looking lizards, which exploded into a cloud of spores. Mash was glad to learn that things he breathed in counted for his skill, so he was impervious to it. Luke's healing covered everything. Red also turned out to be immune to most things. The day went by quickly, and each of them killed hundreds of monsters. As day turned to night, they decided it was time for the last run. They prepared to clear the dungeon and face the boss monster at the end. This dungeon didn't really have any rewards outside of levels, so there wasn't anything particularly special about clearing it. It didn't stop them from wanting to do it though. The challenge alone was enough. After having run the dungeon a few times already, they were pretty familiar with how to clear it. An hour was all it took for them to make it to the final room. The sewer had several rooms within its maze-like design, but the center room was notable for its size. Just like the whole dungeon, murky green water covered the floor. The water level had varied across their multiple attempts. Currently, it sat just above Mash's knees. The water really inconvenienced only Lisa and Jill as they were relatively short. Lisa's dwarven blood made her especially short, so the water rose to her hips. Her slender build didn't help, and she struggled to wade through the water. It wasn't a big deal considering that Jill would fight the boss alone. They had made a game of it, and she had won the right to the first clear. The final room contained a young basilisk and had been estimated to be around level 140. Although that evaluation was a little inflated because of its poisonous nature of it. Creatures that spread poison and disease tended to receive a higher estimated level. The dungeon had already proven that poison didn't do anything to him. And Jill could dodge just about any attack. The boss turned out to be as unimpressive as he had assumed. The basilisk struggled to hurt Jill, and when it did, she just teleported to Luke to get healed. She only got hurt twice. Once when the creature breathed out an acidic mist and another time when it secreted poison into the water around itself. Jill had only barely touched the mist, but it had dissolved nearly all the skin on one of her fingers. While the monster was a little disappointing, Mash's attention was already focused on something else. It was toward his status and soul. Mash's status filled his mind, and he completely forgot about the world around him. He was finally ready to do something with his golden body. Name, Mash Stell Lumber Class, Chimeric Vagabond. Level, 131-137. Health, 3109/3330. Energy, 3799/4590. Fortitude, 401. Endurance, 229. Strength, 341-343. Agility, 379. Intelligence, 230. Wisdom, 130. Charisma, 110. Free stats, 060. Skills, Hunt, Magical Layered Wood, Inhuman Hibernation, Chimeric Transformation, Wooden Birth, Chimeric Reconstruction, Vagabond's Path, Chimeric Domain, Reconstructed Adaptable Monster Core, Chimera's Constitution, Wooden Body, Mimics Avarice, Harbinger of Nothing, Golden Body. Golden Body, passive. Having stolen the techniques of another world, your body evolves beyond its old limitations. However, even this transformation is incomplete. Seek out the next step and truly make this power your own. Trial of the True Body, 77-100/100.